The static on the radio wasn't random, it was a message, and I was the only one who noticed. Most people would have chalked it up to a loose wire or a storm rolling in off the coast, but I've spent enough nights hunched over these dials to know the difference between noise and something pretending to be noise. It was 2:47 a.m., the kind of hour where the world feels like it's holding its breath, and I was alone in the station, surrounded by the hum of ancient equipment and the faint, salty tang of the sea creeping through the cracked window. My name's Eliot Carver. I'm 47, though I've been told I look older, probably from too many years squinting at sound waves in dim light. I'm the audio technician here at WKLR, a crumbling radio station perched on a cliff just outside a foggy little coastal town called Mariner's Hollow. The place is a relic, all peeling paint and rusted antennas, the kind of spot you'd expect to find haunted if you believed in that sort of thing. I don't. I believe in frequencies, patterns, and the stories they tell when you listen close enough. Tonight was supposed to be routine. Check the transmitter, tweak the signal, maybe sip some lukewarm coffee while the late-night jazz playlist droned on for the handful of insomniacs still tuned in. But then I heard it. I'd been fiddling with the receiver, trying to clear up a patch of static that had been nagging at me all week, when the hiss sharpened into something else, short, deliberate bursts buried under the fuzz. I froze, my hand hovering over the knob. It wasn't interference from a fishing boat or some ham radio nut up the coast. It was too consistent, too rhythmic. Like a pulse. I grabbed my headphones, the old ones with the frayed cord, and plugged them into the console. The static filled my ears, a gray wall of sound, but there it was again, those bursts, faint but insistent, repeating every few seconds. I turned up the gain, filtering out the noise until the pattern stood out like a whisper in a crowded room. 3 short tones, a pause, then 2 longer ones. Over and over. It wasn't Morse code, I'd have recognized that right away, but it felt intentional, like someone, or something, was trying to say hello. The station was dead quiet otherwise. No calls, no flickering lights, just the steady crash of waves against the rocks below the cliff. I glanced out the window, half expecting to see a ship's lantern bobbing in the fog, but there was nothing, just the endless gray curtain that swallowed the horizon. My coffee sat forgotten on the desk, steam long gone, as I scribbled the pattern onto a scrap of paper, short, pause, long. It didn't make sense yet, but it didn't have to. Not right away. That's the thing about signals, they don't care if you understand them, they just keep talking until you do. I should have called Vanessa. She's the station manager, 47 and sharp as a tack, with a smile that could charm a shark and a way of shutting down questions before you even ask them. She'd have told me it was nothing, just atmospheric junk, and to get back to work. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she'd been hovering lately, checking the logs more than usual, or the fact that she'd locked the storage room last week with no explanation. I don't trust easily, never have, but I trust my ears, and they were telling me this was worth keeping to myself. For now. So I hit record. The old tape deck whirred to life, capturing every crackle and pop, every hidden tone. If this was a fluke, I'd laugh it off in the morning. If it wasn't, well, I'd figure that out when the sun came up. The clock ticked over to 3 a.m., and the static kept its rhythm, steady as a heartbeat. Outside, the fog pressed thicker against the glass, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was out there, sending those tones through the night, knew I was listening. The morning light struggled through the fog as I woke in my tiny apartment above WKLR, the tape deck from last night sitting on my desk like a silent challenge. I'd barely slept, those mysterious tones, short, pause, long, looping through my head until dawn. It was deliberate, a message hidden in the noise, and I wasn't about to let it slip away. I brewed coffee, the sharp aroma cutting through the salty dampness seeping in from the cracked window, and settled at my desk. The cassette gleamed faintly in the gray light as I plugged my headphones into the laptop, the familiar hiss filling my ears. There it was again, 3 short bursts, a pause, 2 long ones, repeating with mechanical precision. I closed my eyes, letting the rhythm settle, searching for its logic. It wasn't Morse code, I'd ruled that out last night. But it reminded me of something from my ham radio days, a pattern too structured to be random. I scribbled the sequence again, SSSLL. My fingers tapped the desk, tracing it out. Then it clicked, binary. Short could be 0, long could be 1. 3 shorts, 000. 2 longs, 11. That made 000113 in decimal. Too simple on its own, but maybe it was part of something bigger. I rewound the tape, listening past the first loop. After a pause, a new pattern emerged: long, pause, short, long. That was 101 and 0, 5 and 1 in decimal. So, 351. My pulse quickened. 3 numbers, a code begging to be cracked. Coordinates? A frequency? My mind raced. Mariner's Hollow was a coastal speck, defined by cliffs and sea, so coordinates felt right. But latitude and longitude needed more digits. Then I remembered an old trick from local fishermen, a shorthand for marking spots without giving them away. 3 numbers, sector, distance, depth. I grabbed a worn chart of the bay from my shelf, spreading it across the desk. Sector 3 was the northern cliffs, near the lighthouse. Distance 5 could mean 5 nautical miles out, and depth 1 pointed to the shallow reefs. My finger landed on Craig's Tooth, a jagged islet barely breaking the surface, a graveyard for careless ships. I drained my coffee and pulled on my coat. The fog hung thick, cloaking the town in a damp shroud as I crunched down the cliff path to the docks. Old Man Harrow's skiff bobbed at the pier, its paint chipped but seaworthy. Harrow was likely at the pub, so I left a note and some cash, then cast off. The sea was still, the water a mirror beneath the mist, and I guided the boat north, the engine's low growl swallowed by the silence. Craig's Tooth emerged from the fog, a dark splinter of rock topped with a crumbling shack. I tied up and stepped ashore, the sand crunching under my boots. That's when I saw them, fresh footprints leading to the shack. My breath hitched. Someone had been here, and not long ago. I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning, and stepped into the dim, musty interior. A table sat in the center, coated in dust, and on it was an old logbook, its cover warped from years of neglect. I opened it, the pages crackling, and skimmed the faded ink. Weather logs, ship sightings, routine stuff from 20 years back. Then an entry stopped me cold, circled and read: signal received, unknown origin. Pattern, SSSLL. No response. Dated September 12, 2004. My hands shook as I read it. That was the night the Aurora's pride vanished, a freighter lost without a distress call. The lighthouse keeper had heard the same signal I had, right before disaster struck. The entries ended after that date, leaving only questions. A chill settled over me. This wasn't a new signal, it was an echo, resurfacing after 2 decades. But why now? And who'd left those footprints? I tucked the logbook into my coat and stepped outside, scanning the fog. It was thinning, the cliffs faintly visible across the water. Then I saw it, a figure on the ridge, motionless, watching me. I squinted, but before I could make out details, it slipped away into the mist. My skin prickled. Someone knew I was here, and they didn't want company. I hurried back to the skiff, the logbook heavy against my chest, and motored to the docks. The trip back was quiet, but my thoughts churned. The signal, the logbook, the watcher, it was all tied together, and I'd stumbled into the middle of it. Vanessa's recent strangeness flashed through my mind. The locked storage room, her hovering over the logs, did she know something about this? The station was silent when I returned that night, the fog pressing against the windows like a living thing. I'd waited until Vanessa left, her car peeling out of the lot at dusk, headlights cutting through the mist. She hadn't said goodbye, hadn't even looked my way. That silence between us was louder than any argument we'd ever had. I gripped the crowbar I'd brought from home, its cold weight grounding me as I approached the storage room door. Vanessa had changed the lock a month ago, claiming it was for security after a break-in that never made the local paper. I'd believed her then. Now, standing in the dim hallway, the lie felt as tangible as the metal in my hands. The door gave with a splintering crack, louder than I'd expected, and I froze, listening for any sign I wasn't alone. Nothing but the hum of the station's generator answered. I stepped inside, the air thick with dust and the faint tang of salt water. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with old equipment, rusted radios, coiled cables, a cracked compass. But my eyes went straight to the desk in the corner, its surface cluttered with papers and a single locked drawer. I pried it open, the cheap lock snapping under the crowbar's pressure. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but intact. The handwriting was Vanessa's sharp, deliberate, the same script I'd seen on grocery lists and birthday cards. My stomach twisted as I flipped it open, the dates jumping out at me, September 2004. The month the Aurora's pride disappeared. September 10, 2004, he came to the station again today. Insisted we could make it work, that no one would know. I told him it was too risky, but he wouldn't listen. The signals are cover, scrambled, untraceable. If it holds, we're clear. September 11, 2004, it's set for tomorrow. He's bringing the boat in under the fog. I'll jam the lighthouse signal, give him the window he needs. I hate this, but there's no going back. Not after what we've done. September 12, 2004, it's gone wrong. The signal didn't hold, someone picked it up. The ship's lost, and he's not answering. I can't breathe. If they find out, it's over. The words blurred as my hands shook. Vanessa had been working with someone she'd trusted, someone she'd hidden from me. The betrayal wasn't just about the ship, the signal, the lies she'd spun for 20 years. It was personal. She'd had a partner and I'd been blind to it. I sank onto the desk chair, the journal open in my lap. My mind raced back to our early years, her late nights at the station, the way she'd laugh off my questions with that easy smile. I'd met her in 2005, a year after this mess, when she'd moved to Craig's Tooth to start over. She'd been charming, guarded, a puzzle I'd spent years trying to solve. I'd thought I had. But this was a different Vanessa, one who'd risked everything for someone else, who'd built our life on a foundation of secrets. A noise snapped me out of my spiral, a soft thud from the hallway. I shoved the journal into my jacket and crept to the door, peering out. The station was dark, the only light a faint glow from the control room. Then I saw it, a shadow moving fast, disappearing around the corner. My pulse hammered. Someone was here, watching me, just like last night. I grabbed the crowbar and followed, my footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. The control room door was ajar, the radio crackling with static. That signal again, low, rhythmic, like a heartbeat through the noise. I stepped inside, and the static sharpened into a voice, "Vanessa, come in. It's time." The words cut off, replaced by silence so abrupt it felt like a blow. I stared at the radio, my mind reeling. Whoever was out there knew Vanessa, knew about the signal. And they were calling her now, 20 years later. Was she still in contact with him? Was he still alive, waiting for her? I turned to leave, but something on the desk caught my eye, a folded note, fresh ink gleaming under the lamp. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. Eliot, stop digging. You won't like what you find. Leave the station. Now. No signature, but the handwriting wasn't Vanessa's. Someone else was here, warning me off or threatening me. I stuffed the note in my pocket and bolted for the exit, the crowbar still in hand. The fog outside was thicker now, swallowing the station as I stumbled to my truck. I locked the doors and sat there, breathing hard, the journal burning a hole in my jacket. Vanessa's betrayal wasn't just a single act from the past. It was alive, unfolding around me, and I was caught in its web. She'd loved someone else, maybe still did, and she'd let me build a life with her while she carried that secret. The signal, the ship, the man on the radio, it was all tied to her, to us. And now, someone wanted me out of the picture. I started the engine, my knuckles white on the wheel. I couldn't go home, not yet. Not with Vanessa there, pretending nothing had changed. I needed answers, and the journal was my only lead. Tomorrow, I'd confront her, force her to tell me who he was, what they'd done, and why she'd let me love her while she hid this other life. But as I drove into the fog, the radio flickered on, unbidden. That signal again, faint but insistent. And beneath it, a whisper, "She's mine, Eliot." Always was. The voice was low, male, and dripping with possession. I slammed the brakes, the truck skidding to a stop. My chest heaved as I stared at the radio, the words echoing in my skull. Vanessa's betrayal wasn't just a memory. It was a living thing, reaching for me through the static, and I had no idea how deep it ran or how far I'd have to go to escape it. I didn't sleep. The journal sat on my desk like a live wire, its pages burning with Vanessa's secrets, her lover, the signal, the night the Aurora's pride vanished. My wife, the woman I'd shared a life with for nearly 20 years, had been a stranger all along. The betrayal wasn't just a single act, it was a shadow that stretched back to before we'd even met, a lie she'd woven into the fabric of our marriage. And now, with that voice on the radio, she's mine, Eliot. Always was. I knew the past wasn't dead. It was here, clawing its way into the present. By dawn, the fog had thinned, but the weight in my chest hadn't. I drove back to the station, the journal tucked under my arm, my mind churning with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. Vanessa's car was already in the lot when I arrived, her headlights cutting through the mist. She'd beaten me here, unusual for her. My stomach knotted as I parked beside her, the engine ticking in the silence. Inside, the station was cold, the air thick with the scent of salt and old wood. Vanessa stood by the control desk, her back to me, her shoulders tense beneath her coat. She didn't turn when I entered, but I knew she'd heard me. The silence stretched, taut as a wire. "We need to talk," I said, my voice rough from lack of sleep. She turned slowly, her face pale in the dim light, her eyes guarded. "About what?" Her tone was careful, measured, like she was testing the waters. I pulled the journal from my jacket and held it up. "About this. About 2004. About the signal and him." Her breath hitched, just for a second, but she recovered fast. "Eliot, what are you?" "Don't," I cut in, sharper than I'd meant. "I found your journal. I know about the ship, the signal you jammed, the man you were with. I know you've been hiding this from me, from us, for years." Vanessa's jaw tightened, her gaze flicking to the journal, then back to me. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it, but something in my face must have told her it was pointless. She exhaled, slow and deliberate, and sank into the chair by the desk. "You weren't supposed to find that. That's all you have to say?" My hands shook as I set the journal on the table between us. "You've been lying to me for 2 decades, Vanessa. You had a lover, someone you were willing to risk everything for, and you let me build a life with you like none of it happened." Her eyes flashed, a spark of defiance cutting through her calm. "It was over, Eliot. He was gone, dead, I thought. I moved on. I chose you." "Chose me?" I laughed, the sound bitter in my throat. "You chose to bury your secrets and hope they never surfaced. But they have, haven't they? That signal, it's back. And last night, I heard him. He said you're still his." Vanessa's face drained of color, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk. "You heard, what?" "On the radio. She's mine, Eliot. Always was." My voice cracked on the last word, the anger giving way to something raw. "Who is he, Vanessa? Is he still out there? Is that why you've been locking doors, checking logs, because you knew he'd come back?" She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You don't understand. It's not what you think." "Then explain it," I demanded, stepping closer. "Tell me who he is. Tell me what you did that night." Her gaze darted to the window, then back to me, her resolve crumbling. "His name was Marcus. He was a smuggler, ran contraband up the coast. We got involved. It was a mistake, a stupid fling. But he convinced me to help him one last time. The Aurora's pride wasn't supposed to be there, it was a cargo ship, off course in the fog. Marcus needed the lighthouse signal jammed to slip past the Coast Guard. I did it. I jammed the signal, and the ship, it hit the rocks." Her voice broke, but she pressed on. "Marcus disappeared that night. I thought he'd died in the wreck, or fled. I never heard from him again until now." I stared at her, the pieces clicking into place. "The signal, it's him, isn't it? He's back, and he's using the same code you two set up." Vanessa nodded, her eyes wet. "He must have reactivated the buoy. I don't know how, but he's out there, trying to reach me." He thinks I'll help him again. And will you? The question hung between us, heavy as the fog outside. She shook her head, but her hesitation spoke louder than her words. No. I can't. Not after what happened. I wanted to believe her, but the doubt gnawed at me. Then why didn't you tell me? Why keep this locked away? Because I was ashamed, she whispered. I thought it was over. I didn't want to lose you. I turned away, my chest tight. You already have. The words landed like a blow, and she flinched. But before she could respond, the radio crackled to life, the static sharpening into that familiar pattern, short, pause, long. Then, a voice low, gravelly, and unmistakable, Vanessa, I'm waiting. Come alone. You know where. I spun toward the radio, my blood running cold. Vanessa's face was a mask of fear, her hands trembling as she stared at the speaker. He's here, she breathed. He's back in Mariner's Hollow. The station's door creaked open behind us, and a gust of cold air swept in. I turned, crowbar in hand, but the hallway was empty, just the fog curling in like smoke. Then, footsteps echoed from the stairwell, slow and deliberate, descending toward us. Vanessa grabbed my arm, her grip tight. Eliot, we need to leave. Now. But I stood rooted, the journal's weight pressing against my chest, the signal's rhythm pounding in my ears. Marcus was here, in the station, and he wasn't just a ghost from the past. He was real, and he'd come to claim what he thought was his. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and I knew one thing for certain, whatever happened next, our lives would never be the same. The footsteps stopped just beyond the control room door, a shadow stretching across the threshold, long and jagged in the flickering light. My grip tightened on the crowbar, the cold metal slick against my palm. Vanessa's hand lingered on my arm, her fingers trembling, but her eyes were locked on the doorway, wide, searching, like she could will the past to stay buried. Eliot, please, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the radio's faint hum. Let's go. We can figure this out somewhere else. I shook her off, stepping forward. No. He's here, Vanessa. Running won't change what you did or what he wants. The shadow shifted, and a figure stepped into the room. Marcus. He was leaner than I'd imagined, his face weathered by years at sea, sharp cheekbones framed by a tangle of dark hair streaked with gray. His coat hung loose, damp with fog, and his boots left faint smears of mud on the floor. But it was his eyes that hit me hardest, cold, piercing, fixed on Vanessa like I wasn't even there. You came, he said, his voice low and rough, matching the one from the radio. A faint smile curled his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Knew you couldn't stay away. Vanessa stiffened beside me, her breath catching. I didn't come for you, Marcus. I'm here with Eliot. His gaze flicked to me then, sizing me up, the smile fading. The husband. Heard about you. Didn't think you'd be the type to dig where you shouldn't. I raised the crowbar slightly, not a threat yet, just a warning. I found her journal. I know what you two did, jamming the signal, sinking the Aurora's pride. What I don't know is why you're back now, after 20 years. Marcus tilted his head, studying me like I was a puzzle he hadn't expected to solve. 20 years is a long time to run, Carver. Long time to hide. But I never stopped listening. He tapped his ear, a mocking gesture. That signal? It's mine. Been broadcasting it from a buoy off Craig's Tooth, waiting for her to hear it. Waiting for her to remember. Remember what? Vanessa snapped, her voice cracking with something between fear and anger. That night was a mistake. You disappeared, Marcus. I thought you were dead. He stepped closer, his boots scuffing the floor, and I shifted to block his path. Dead, he chuckled, the sound dry and bitter. No, darling. I was caught, Coast Guard nabbed me after the wreck. Spent a decade locked up, another 10 scraping by, planning my way back. You were supposed to wait for me. I didn't know you anything, she told back, but her words trembled, and I saw the guilt flicker across her face. Marcus's expression darkened. You owed me everything. That signal was our code, our promise. You jammed the lighthouse, sure, but when it went wrong, you let me take the fall. Moved on with him, he jerked his chin at me like I never existed. I felt the words like a punch, the truth of them sinking in. Vanessa hadn't just hidden her past, she'd rewritten it, left Marcus while she built a life with me. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. She made her choice. You're too late. Choice? Marcus laughed again, sharper this time. She's been lying to you, Carver. Ask her about the calls, the ones she's been taking late at night, out by the cliffs. Ask her why she didn't burn that journal. I turned to Vanessa, my pulse hammering. What's he talking about? Her face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. Eliot, I didn't know it was him at first. A few weeks ago, I started getting calls static, then that signal pattern. I thought it was a prank, or my imagination. But then he spoke, told me he was coming. I didn't tell you because I was scared of losing you, of facing him. You've been talking to him? My voice rose, the betrayal cutting deeper. After everything I found, you still kept this from me? I was trying to end it, she cried. I told him to stay away, that it was over. I didn't want this. Marcus smirked, leaning against the console. She's good at lying, isn't she? Always was. But she didn't end it, Carver. She listened. She met me once, out by the docks, thought I didn't see her watching from the pier. Enough, I snapped, rounding on him. You want her? She's not yours to take. Whatever you had, it's gone. Leave, or I make you. He straightened, his hand slipping into his coat pocket, and my muscles tensed. You think you can scare me off? I've waited too long for this. Vanessa, tell him you never stopped thinking about me. Her silence was deafening, her eyes darting between us. I saw the truth in her hesitation, the part of her that hadn't let Marcus go, not fully. My chest burned, the weight of 20 years collapsing in that moment. Vanessa, I said, quieter now, say it. Tell me he's wrong. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Marcus stepped forward, closing the gap, his voice softening. Come with me, Ness. We can start over, leave this place, leave him. You know where to find me. The radio crackled again, the signal pulsing through the static, short, pause, long, like a heartbeat calling her name. Vanessa flinched, and I saw her resolve waver. No, I said, planting myself between them. She's not going anywhere with you. Marcus's hand hovered in the air, his fingers twitching as if reaching for something he couldn't grasp. He lowered his arm, his eyes narrowing as they locked onto Vanessa. The smirk he'd worn moments ago was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate edge. You think this is over, he said, his voice a low rasp, cutting through the hum of the radio. You think you can just turn your back on me again, Ness? Vanessa's hand tightened around my arm, her breath quick and uneven. She didn't look at me, her gaze was fixed on Marcus, her eyes wide, as if she were staring into a mirror she'd tried to shatter years ago. I did turn my back, she said, her voice soft but firm, trembling at the edges. 20 years ago. I left that life behind. Marcus let out a sharp, bitter laugh that bounced off the walls, mingling with the faint crackle of static. Left it behind? You didn't leave it, darling. You buried it. But it's still alive, we're still alive. I stepped forward, placing myself between them, my hands empty but my shoulders squared. She made her choice, Marcus. You don't belong here anymore. His gaze flicked to me, cold and cutting, like I was an afterthought. You don't get it, Carver. You've got the tame version of her, the one who plays house, who keeps the station running. But I know the real Vanessa. The one who lived for the rush, who jammed that signal because it needed to her. Vanessa flinched beside me, and his words hit like a stone sinking into deep water. I remembered her journal. I hate this, but there's no going back, and the pieces clicked together. She'd hinted at it, but hearing it from him, seeing the way her head dipped, made it real. Is that true? I asked, my voice barely audible over the distant crash of waves. Did you want that life, Vanessa? The danger? She turned to me, her eyes shimmering with tears she wouldn't let fall. I did, Eliot. Back then, I was young, reckless. I thought I needed something bigger, something wild. But I was wrong. I figured that out a long time ago. Marcus leaned against the console, crossing his arms with a casual air that didn't match the sharpness in his eyes. Wrong? You loved it, Ness. Every second, until it all went sideways. And even after, you couldn't let go. That journal, those late nights listening to the signal. You kept me close, didn't you? Stop it, she snapped, her voice breaking like glass. I kept the journal to remember what it cost me, what I almost lost. Not to hold on to you. He straightened, stepping closer, his tone dropping to something softer, almost coaxing. And me? Did you forget me completely? Or did you hear that signal and wonder if I'd come back for you? The room went still. The radio buzzed faintly, the signal pulsing, short, pause, long, like a heartbeat from the past. Vanessa's face crumpled, and I saw it, the hesitation, the pull of whatever they'd once been. My stomach twisted, a dull ache spreading through me. Vanessa, I said, my throat tight, have you been waiting for him? She shook her head, but her eyes slid away from mine, and that was answer enough. Maybe she hadn't meant to wait, but a piece of her had lingered, caught in the static of those old memories. The signal, her silence, it all added up. Marcus smiled, slow and sure. You see, Carver? She's not all yours. Never was. Come with me, Ness. We can vanish again, start fresh. You know where I'll be. He turned toward the door, pausing just long enough to let his offer hang in the air. The signal pulsed once more, then faded into silence. Vanessa's hand slipped from my arm, and she took a step forward. My breath caught. Vanessa, don't, I whispered, but she didn't turn back. Marcus, she said, her voice steady now, you're right. I did love that life once. The chaos, the freedom. But that's not me anymore. I chose Eliot. I chose this. He froze, his back to us, his shoulders stiff. You're fooling yourself. No, she said, louder, resolute. I'm not. I made mistakes, big ones, but I've changed. I'm not going with you. It's done. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken things. Then Marcus chuckled, a hollow, defeated sound. You'll regret it, Ness. When this quiet life chokes you, when you miss what we had, you'll wish you'd said yes. He walked out, the door groaning shut behind him, his footsteps swallowed by the fog. The radio went quiet, the signal snuffed out like a candle. I let out a shaky breath, the tension bleeding from my body, but the hurt stayed, sharp and unyielding. Vanessa turned to me, her face pale, her eyes searching mine. Eliot, Not now, I cut in, my voice flat, hollow. I can't. She nodded, swallowing hard, and stepped away. The gap between us felt vast, unbridgeable. She'd chosen me, but it didn't feel like winning. It felt like losing something I hadn't known was already slipping away. The fog outside began to thin, dawn's light creeping through the mist, casting faint shadows across the floor. I walked to the window, staring out at the gray sea. Somewhere out there, Marcus was disappearing, but the real struggle was here, in the quiet that settled over us. We need to talk, I said at last, still facing the glass. About all of it. She didn't reply, but I heard her move closer, her presence a fragile thread tying us together and pulling us apart. The signal was gone, Marcus was gone, but the truth lingered, a weight we'd have to carry or let crush us.